Welcome back to Seeking Our Spirit. Got another great episode for you. Sitting down and chatting with a good friend of mine and really a partner in ministry and soon-to-be colleague, William Simerly. It was a great chat, and so happy to bring that to you. Hope you enjoy it. As always, if you want to tell your story or you know anybody who would like to tell their story, their spiritual journey, contact me so you can be on the show at seekingourspirit@gmail.com. Enjoy. All right, cool. We're rolling, Mr. Williams, sir. Salud.
Salud.
Got you in some of my tequila. I'll get, maybe one day, if anyone can get me a tequila sponsor, that would be beautiful.
Well, there's this
if
one.
You want to know, we're drinking Simerly. It's a beautiful tequila. Great tequila.
We wanted to, for the wedding, there was this one. We ended up getting you that one.
Yes.
But there was this other brand that Ashton had heard about that some, priest. We thought it was a Roman Catholic priest.
Right.
He's an Episcopal priest. He, somewhere in Mexico. I don't know. No. Ashton knows about it.
There's a tequila that's from an Episcopal priest?
Apparently.
Come on.
I don't know. We tried to get it.
How told me this?
Well, it was going to be a surprise, and then we couldn't order it. Total Wine couldn't get it. It was a whole thing.
Oh, thank you. That's very cool.
So I'll find out and
and then he can
get you
sponsor.
Honestly, though, you need to interview him.
Yes, that's right.
The Spirit and Spirits.
Journey. That's right. Spiritual Journey to Tequila.
That could be your spinoff podcast, Spirit and Spirits.
That's right. Okay. We derailed. Anyway, welcome, William. It's good to have you. I'm happy that you're doing this with me, and excited to speak with you. You were joking a moment ago, saying, "What? You only have 26 years."
I've listened to the episodes really so far, and I'm the youngest person. I'm a good old 26 years old, so about a quarter century. And Howard, you had this great conversation with him, and I don't know how old Howard is, but a lot longer than me. So I don't want to say if that's 2 quarter centuries, or I'm not going to go any further. But so I have a shorter life experience, but I do have things that have happened. And all that jazz.
It's all spiritual.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, where do you want to jump in? So for William Simerly, what is, when you look back at your quote unquote spiritual life, your journey, timeline? I know enough about your timeline to know you were very churched.
I wouldn't say very churched.
Yeah.
So I grew up native East Tennessean. I grew up in the Tri-Cities, Northeast Tennessee.
We should have. I make this mistake all the time because I just know you. So why don't you just tell
Rewind.
people who you are? And
my name is William Simerly. I am 26 years old, as I've already said. I've lived a quarter century on this planet. I'm currently about ready to enter my senior year of seminary at Sewanee. Hopefully in the next year be ordained a priest in the Episcopal Church. I know Brett because we worked together at a parish here in Knoxville. And grew up in the Tri-Cities. I grew up United Methodist, which they are going through their whole struggle right now. And I heard about that from my parents' perspective because I was just home, so that was interesting.
Yeah.
Got some growing pains going on there. But I grew up the Tri-Cities, technically Elizabethton, fairly small community. Went to high school. I had graduated with a class of 100. I have a twin brother. That's my fun fact.
Yeah. Perfect. So speaking of Elizabethton and childhood and all that stuff, so where do you enter into, what's your first memory of spirituality?
I remember, so we grew up at Valley Forge United Methodist Church. The church was 2 minutes below our house. My mother's family, a few generations back, had helped to found the church. And that was our church. And we were there almost every Sunday. We were not Sunday night church people or Wednesday night church people, but we were there Sunday morning. Some of my earliest memories were of Sunday school because my mom taught our Sunday school class, and we had a good group of probably 6 to 8 young kids in the same Sunday school class. Before that, when I was an infant, I had been christened, which, what is christening? Great question. Ended up, I was baptized twice. We'll get to the second baptism later on. So yeah, I mean, that was just
It is a weird distinction.
It was weird, and yeah, it was weird.
I still run into that sometimes.
Yeah. But yeah, that was home. So I mean, I remember Sunday school. You know, we had it before church, and you know, Bible lessons, and I don't remember a lot of the substance of it.
Yeah.
But I remember just being there.
So this is something that's interesting for me as I have these conversations with folk, and it's I guess it's part of, like, in a way, what made me want to start doing these conversations, where I realized that. So I had an awareness of God from very young.
Yeah.
Whatever we call that thing. I had this awareness of this other thing, very, very young. And I realize now that that's not, it took me a long time to realize this, but that's not everyone's story.
Yeah.
And, which, I'm not saying there's a good or bad to any of that. I just realized that, and it made me really curious about, wow, well, so if that's not what their story is, then what is it? And then even as I'm saying that to you, though, it becomes very difficult for me even to, like, parse out, because I was born and raised in the church. So did I just have that awareness of God in that spiritual life, or was it that my mother and father had me in the church, you know, baptized as an infant, there, present, you know, reading the Bible stories, you know, my parents did that stuff. So I don't know, it's just an interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think we didn't really practice faith in the home. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that was part of your journey, but we didn't do that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we weren't nominal Christians, but like church stayed at church and home stayed at home, kind of. Like, we didn't pray before meals. We didn't read Bible stories. I mean, I had a wonderful childhood. I'm not saying that I didn't. Sure. But like they were kind of separate, and I don't really know why.
I'd say it's quite common.
But I think it is common, because I think, well, you and I have talked about this, you know, that parents and families often don't have the language to talk about God at home, or they don't feel comfortable, or they're like, oh, we're going to mess up some way. Right. That's a passion project of mine.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, Sunday school, I mean, in church, and I remember, especially as a young child, two things. One, probably the first one, we, as good Methodists, we only did communion on the first Sunday of every month. But I distinctly remember I was probably like 7, maybe 8, and after we'd had communion one Sunday, and there's something about it that always fascinated me. I don't know what about it did, but it was something that was different from our other Sundays. Like, there was a more reverent, I guess. It just enamored me. So one Sunday after church, after we'd had communion, you know, we were at home, and like my grandmother would often come to our house after church on Sunday, and like somehow we had like grape juice and bread in the kitchen, and like I just went around and like pretend to give communion to everyone. So that idea of, you know, like play but spirituality was kind of tied up together, which I think is, I don't have kids, but I think it can be common.
Yeah, it's really funny that that's a very common story for folks who end up in ministry.
I have heard that before, yeah. And the second thing was, I was maybe a little bit older, but still probably elementary school. It was around Christmas time, and I was just a weird kid too, so this may have also been part of that. But, you know, we were like talking about Christmas and stuff, and I just asked my mom, I was like, well, why don't we talk about Jesus's mom any? Like, she had a big part in this, and like she maybe gets a side cuff mention, oh yeah, and Mary. And she was like, I don't know, honey. So from then on, I was just kind of like, well, there's more to the story than what they're telling me. Like, so that it just kind of stuck out to me.
An interest and awareness, sort of.
Yeah. Look, there's more going on here than maybe what I'm being told.
Yeah. So it sounds to me, in a way, that then your answer to that first question is your first memorable experiences of spirituality of some shape or form was through church, though. it was through worship.
Yeah, and
Or
yeah,
Sunday school.
yeah, definitely like early. I in later elementary school, I had never really been a part of sports or club or anything, so I wanted to take piano lessons. So probably like 4th grade, I started taking piano lessons, and then and even before then, like in church, like I liked singing hymns, I liked the music, I liked all that. So that got me into the piano, and then from then on, I was just kind of involved in music. And in music, I found a creative output, whatever. And as I continued along that journey, I think I began to feel closer to God as I went through middle school and high school and all that stuff. So that's elementary school.
Do you think, a couple of things I'm thinking of here. One, which try to say this without making us go down a whole theological rabbit trail here, but
if that's what the people want, the people can have that. Okay.
Well, I just always think so. Like you're naming you're naming communion, Eucharist, as being this spiritual touch point for you. I think it is for many people, and it just reminds me of stories and experiences I've had, and this gets all into the whole debate around open table, right? So for people that don't know that phrase, it's whether or not one should be required to be baptized, as is traditionally done in at least in our tradition, or not. And so anyway, just the fact that so many people point to the Eucharist as being the entrance point, if not one of the major entrance points for them in their relationship with God. Yeah. Just sort of brings that all up to me in terms of like how important that is. And I don't know that I should tell the story here, but having experienced with a parishioner before, someone who claimed to be atheist, coming with their family, would always go to the rail, get a blessing, and it's a moment I'll never forget in my life. You've probably heard me tell this story, but like they decided to have communion one Sunday. I don't even know who gave it to them, and they called me the next day, like bawling, crying, saying, "Is that what you feel every time you have communion?" Like, still sort of brings me to tears. Of just how powerful that was for him. And then I ended up baptizing him. Yeah. So anyway, that whole topic comes to mind there, which is definitely really fascinating.
Definitely.
And then the other thing that comes to mind is then music. Yeah. And how. So would you name? You said creative outlet, but would you say that was like a different lens into spirituality?
Definitely. As I got older, and kind of started with piano lessons, then in like I don't know exactly what year, probably 5th grade, I joined a children's choir, and children's choirs have this like bad rap for being like, oh, they just sing these cringy songs. But like the one I was in, like I was exposed to all types of music, and I was exposed to sacred music, and I was like, oh, there's something going on there. And I think just from then on throughout to now, music has always been a way for me to connect with God and with others, and to express myself. So especially like choral music, that's always been a big part of me. So
I think that again, another possible, like we could really go real far with this, but music to me is a really interesting topic within talking about spirituality, because I don't know, maybe people think like this all the time. I don't tend to really recognize this all the time, but when you really break down and think about like what's happening in singing, right? We make these noises, we're talking, we use these words, and they have significance, and we have conversation. But then there's this other thing, this
whole like dimension,
that is using
the body,
using
the natural world. You have to use air in order to have that happen. Yeah,
right. I mean, it's
it's incredible
spiritual thing. Yeah, I mean, to create beauty,
and then to do that with others,
emotion in a way that can't be done with just words. Yeah, I mean It's really fascinating, and you can even look at instruments like that. It's a little harder with like guitar, but like drumming, for example. Like using that body rhythm. So I just think that's a fascinating angle into spirituality, and I think it's unfortunately something that a lot of people perhaps don't. I'm perhaps making an assumption, but that a lot of people maybe don't recognize. And then even within that conversation, I'm already talking too much, sorry. Like, we see this in church a lot. Like,
yeah.
And this could be stated for all things prayer or spiritual, I think. So with music, with singing, you can do that. And if you recognize all the things we just said, and hold that intention, it can be completely deeply spiritual.
Oh, yeah.
Or
you're
it can just be surface
doing
level
it. Yeah.
performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that is, music is a great way to recognize that point carries all throughout spirituality.
Yeah.
You can pray and it be just surface, or you can
like
pray and it be
pray, and then
right. Or like going to the Eucharist. It can just be getting bread and wine, or it can change your entire life. Or you can do something secular and it be just secular, whatever, or it can be deeply powerful and spiritual. And I love that.
Yeah, God's kind of funny. I think so.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, sorry, preaching.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to name? Elementary school, middle school, that.
Well, middle school brought its own challenges.
Okay.
So
church, music,
going to church Sundays. We're there. I started taking piano lessons. It's great. La 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 la.
Do you remember like a relationship with God in these things?
No.
Okay.
It was just going.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
No, not yet.
Okay, that's interesting.
No, I was just going. Middle school came, and I realized that I was different. Surprise, dear listener, I'm gay. And I discovered that about myself.
In middle school?
In middle school. I had known...
remember, like, the moment?
Yes, I do. So it was in 5th grade, and we were at lunch in the cafeteria, and the principal blew their whistle and was like, hey, y'all need to stop calling each other gay and lesbian and all that stuff. And I was like, I was a very sheltered child. And I was like, what does that mean? And I didn't ask anybody at school because I was like, I didn't want them to get onto me. So I went home and I asked my mom. I was like, Mom, what does that mean? And she was like, well, those are people who like boys who like boys and girls who like girls. And I just kind of sat there and I was like, oh. And inside I was like, oh, that's me. And all I could say was, oh, that's weird. And she said, yeah, it kind of is. And so from then on, I knew I was different.
That's fascinating, though, because, it almost sounds, don't let me put words in your mouth, but it almost sounds like, so you hadn't even had categories or an awareness for even,
oh, no.
attraction to, but it also sounds like you already knew.
Yeah, I knew, because I knew I
boys, to men.
Oh, yeah. I knew that. There was...
But you didn't know that was different, or that was...
No, we didn't talk about a lot of things in my family. Yeah. We didn't talk about a lot of things. Yeah. And I knew that I was different and that it was wrong.
Well, that's another
because
level.
No one was talking about it. So that happened. So I just kind of muddled through middle school and, was in this choir and it was fun. And
you just kept that to yourself.
Oh yeah, no, that went to no one. And probably later middle school, and then around that same time, probably 5th, 6th grade, we went to basically a youth revival that the Methodist Conference would hold every year in Gatlinburg. And so my brother and I and a couple, the last night, my brother and I, a couple of us got saved. Thank God. And, looking back, it was emotional manipulation is what it was. Because, everyone's crying and you're like, I remember specifically the kids from my group, we were like, well, everyone's crying. I guess we need to cry.
This is important. Yeah.
Yes, this is important. So we started crying and then we went up and we got saved. So then 2 weeks later, when we were back in our home church, we all got baptized, dunked up front. So that was my second baptism. So yeah, but even from that point on, and like kind of through later middle school and into early high school, like I mean, I would sit at night in my bed and pray to change me, because I knew it wasn't right, and like we didn't talk about it, but like I knew it wasn't right, and that I was wrong, and that I didn't need to be this way.
Yeah. Well, let's be careful with those words, though, right? Like,
oh, correct.
You
at that time.
That's what was being sort of imposed on you.
Correct.
From the
Yeah.
outside. That's the messaging that you were getting, right?
Correct. Yes.
So something that I'm seeing there, though, that's interesting, because you were saying, before I asked you, like, did you perceive any relationship with God? And you said not exactly yet.
No.
Now you named, the story of sort of discovering that, according to society, you were in a different category.
Yeah.
But then you jumped to
being like,
praying.
Change me. Yeah. Because I was like, there's
whether or not that's obviously there's a lot going on in that prayer, and it's
a little
loaded, right, with a lot of expectation and things. But you're having an individual relationship with God. So do you recall when that started? Was it around sexuality questions?
Oh yeah. No, it was around. Yeah, I mean it was like 7th, 8th grade, probably, maybe even into freshman year.
But so that's like, do you think, like, would it be wrong to say that your sort of internal discovery of identity and sexuality, because that was something that you had to carry alone for a while, that in turn
very
started a relationship with God?
Maybe, because I mean, like, I didn't. Yeah, I mean, I didn't. I told no one. Yeah. No one. That was my cross to bear, if that is a cross. But yeah, I mean, I didn't tell, and I guess, I was like, well, I can't force this to change, so like, I'm just gonna.
But you started going to a higher power.
Yeah, because I was like, well, maybe he can do it. Yeah, I would just sit in bed at night. And be like, please change me. Please change me.
Wow, that's just so powerful. I mean, so two sides of that. Obviously, the change me part is heartbreaking, and I don't want to celebrate that part, but it's so powerful to think that, like, your discovery of self, brought you to your first recollection of, like,
looks like I need to update my spiritual autobiography after this. Lord, okay.
I mean, that's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, honestly,
that kicks off this entire journey of you with God, right?
I guess so. Dang.
Wow. I like that. Okay. Sorry.
No.
Does that click for you?
Oh, it does. Yeah, I never thought about it that way, but yeah, I think so.
Wow.
Definitely.
Okay. So, okay, put a pin in that. And then obviously, though, there's a lot to be worked out. Because, as you said, that tone is
yes.
Right, okay.
So lots of feels going on with inside of me. So kind of in kind of end of middle school into early high school, my family had two really traumatic things happen. So in 8th grade, my dad's youngest sister, it was a family of 4 kids. His youngest sister, she died unexpectedly. She basically had. You're anxious about your table. There we go. That's okay. She basically had, I don't know if it was a massive heart attack or whatever, but she came home from work, went to bed, and her heart essentially exploded.
She was how old?
Oh, she was like mid-30s.
Okay. Wow.
Healthy. I mean, completely unexpected. So that was extremely traumatic, and that was really my first encounter with death. So that happened, and it affected my grandmother and my dad and the whole family. It was really bad. She had 2 sons. It was terrible. And then a year and a month later, in December of my freshman year of high school, my uncle, who had married into the family, he died suddenly. So we had 2 years there where it was really, really hard. And I think it definitely affected people in my family's faith. It didn't necessarily affect mine, but the whole atmosphere in our family system was dampened. by that.
So say more about that. So affected you.
Well,
faith,
like
faith
my
life,
yeah.
then how,
So like
and
my
yours not so much how.
yeah. So my paternal grandmother, whose daughter died, she had been coming to our church ever since before we were born. She was Free Will Baptist originally, but then started coming to our Methodist church whenever, and she stopped coming to church. She's not really been to church ever since.
So sort of like, why God?
Basically,
Like how
yeah.
this-
Yeah. So that was a big thing, and just kind of missing her presence. Because I have memories of like being in church with her and like playing through her pocketbook and stuff when I was little, and surprise, because play with Mama's pocketbook in the pew. Well, I wish I had one of these. Yeah, but she wasn't there anymore, and it was just weird. And just death, I think any child, any young person's first experience with death is always kind of a pivotal moment in their life. So that happened.
And when you say it didn't really affect your faith life, like what?
I kept going to church, and I was sad, but I don't know, and we grieved, but we just kind of picked up the pieces and kept going.
It is sort of an interesting thing to watch, right? That to some extent, and I rail against this a lot, but a lot of what in some ways church is about, organized Christianity, is dealing with questions of after death.
Yes.
I would argue too much so, probably.
Oh, yes.
Right? And that it's not really about that. But that's what, for most people,
yes,
church is about.
Church is about.
And so it's just fascinating when you see, and I don't really know where to go with that.
Yeah.
It's how maybe the church isn't doing a good job. I don't know. That, even then adults, when they're faced with death and despair and sudden death and whatever, just the tragedies of life, that's still isn't enough. They can totally still fall away from it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. So that happened, and that, just for my family in general, it was a really hard time. It was hard for my dad. He had a really hard time there. But then, I was in high school and was in marching band, and because I'm a nerd, and I enjoyed high school much more than middle school, as most people do.
Just socially.
Yeah. I had good friends, and still wasn't out to any of them, especially my first 3 years. But was just kind of discovering more about who I was, and I really think my junior year, I really kind of started to begin to live my life for myself. Because I had been at our little church I had grown up in, I was having to help play the piano or the organ every Sunday, and the ministers, we'd had a couple of ministers in a row who just were not good. And I remember just being in church and being like, this sucks. I hate being here. And that's not a good feeling. You don't want that feeling. And I was just like, this is miserable. But at the same time, I had been, in choirs and singing music and exposed to this music, like sacred music, music from the Roman Catholic tradition, that I was like, this is beautiful. I want to know more about this.
That's through school?
Kind of through school, through private voice study, being in community choirs and stuff.
Oh, okay. Got it.
And I was like, this is really beautiful. I want to know more about this. So I did as any good child of the 21st century does, and I turned to Google and just started Googling. And I was reading about religion and buying books on religion, and just kind of, because I was also a big history person, and my family was, so I enjoyed history and, religion and religious history. So I just started reading, and, I was intrigued by Roman Catholicism, but I was like, I don't think that's going to mix very well with me. But then I was just researching, kind of the history of Methodism, and came upon Anglicanism, and was like, and kind of kept reading through that, and then found out about the Episcopal Church, and I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. And this is probably like junior year of high school. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I think we have an Episcopal church in our town and in the next town over. So I just did a lot of reading. I read basically between my junior and senior year of high school, I read almost every Wikipedia article and watched every video on YouTube I could.
Yeah.
Because I was just interested. And I hadn't like set foot in a church yet.
Yeah. About the Episcopal church?
About the Episcopal church.
Okay. And that's at that point, that's still purely just about music? You didn't discover
music had been the gateway. Music had been the gateway.
Had you then started to discover sort of... Well, I got a couple questions here.
Well, go ahead, yeah.
Like, one, prior to that, the story that you're telling now.
Yeah.
Internally, spiritually, relationship with God, what's going on?
Oh, it was nothing going on. And I was like, this sucks.
And were you still, like, in terms of sexuality, going like, this isn't right?
I by that point, I had come to terms with it myself. Mm-hmm. And right before I started my senior year of high school, I came out to my best friend. Mm-hmm. And
is that like, I'm sorry, I
you're
lots
fine.
of questions, but so like, I guess I'm making assumptions that because of sort of your generation, that there had to be some helpful things as you were processing your experience, who you were, in terms of just society,
media.
Just media, whatever,
like I watched.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah. So I mean, my school definitely was not a safe place.
Rural East Tennessee, definitely not.
Not great.
But at least in your generation at time, it's like,
we have the internet. Yeah, so I mean,
in the world like
So I mean, there was YouTube, and I watched YouTubers because it was the age of YouTubers, and again was just watching videos and reading and kind of figuring out that like, well, this is just how I am.
Right. So that all helped a little bit. But then spiritually, you still hadn't sort of revisited that. Okay.
No, and it was and then when I was reading about the Episcopal Church and found out about Gene Robinson, who was the first openly gay man consecrated a bishop in Christian history, which was in the Episcopal Church in 2003. And I started listening to his sermons, and they changed my life. Because it was the first time I had heard someone say, you are loved, and there's nothing wrong with you, and that, God made you, and you are good. So he was really, and his story and his preaching really helped me. And then just like more... Yeah, I mean, it was hugely, hugely impactful.
So then that obviously brought another level of interest to the
and then like like the liturgy, even though I didn't know a lot about the liturgy, I knew it would give me that same feeling as like having communion on the first Sunday of the month, but I was like, oh, but they do this every Sunday, that's nice. So senior year of high school was a big year for me because I had come out to my best friend. And she said, I kind of knew, and it's okay, I love you. And I started coming out to a handful of other close friends. Some of those were fine, some of those weren't. And, I just kind of left them by the wayside. So then, okay, it's time to decide where am I going to go to college. Well, I was going to go in as a music major, even though my parents begged me not to. I did, a vocal music education. And I decided on UT here in Knoxville for several reasons. A, they had a fairly brand new school of music, which was a really good place to study. B, it was 2 hours from home, so I could kind of live my own life, but still be home if something happened or if I needed to go home. And the other reason was they had a vibrant Episcopal Lutheran campus ministry, and I wanted to be a part of it. I found it online, saw old videos, and called Tyson House. And I was like, I want to be a part of that.
Big in my life too, interestingly.
Yeah. So, and kind of that summer before going to graduated high school, that summer in between, I was able to go visit one of the Episcopal churches in the next town over in Johnson City once or twice. Not for a Sunday morning, but like I think I went to like a Tuesday night healing Eucharist, and I was like,
St. John's?
St. John's. And I was like, this is beautiful. I want more of this. But like I skirted in and like left immediately after it was over. But yeah, so
So spiritually, I mean, it's fascinating because like the story of your spirituality is intensely tied then to identity. I mean, that's the thread I see in all of this, right? Because like you tell me where I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Because like I see at the beginning, right? Like what we sort of pulled out already.
Yeah.
And then you said that whole span up to sort of finding a church that is accepting.
Late high school.
That your internal spiritual life sort of wasn't there.
Oh no.
Like right. So
I hated going to church. Yeah.
So that's okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So yeah, I think up through then, and maybe up through the first part of college, it definitely was. But there was a shift.
Right.
And we can get to that in due time. But yeah, so came to Knoxville, good old Knox Vegas, the 865. Had my first semester at UT, got involved at Tyson House. I mean, that was one of the first things I did when I got here was like they had welcome week events, and I went and I tie-dyed a t-shirt, and I had never been there before. But and
this is what year?
Fall of 2015.
Okay.
And I distinctly remember, so we talk about mountaintop moments where that you definitely remember and could feel the presence of God, and it was my first Sunday night service there.
Really?
Oh yeah, like just coming in and the music and the people and the liturgy. Like I just felt this overwhelming sense of God's presence and of God's love for me and for everyone. So it became a big. Tyson House was a huge part of my time at UT for about 2.5-3 years. And then again, first semester. So going into UT, I had vowed not to tell my parents. They still didn't know about my sexuality. And going into college, I was like, I'm going to wait till I've graduated and can financially support myself, and then I'll tell them. Because I just didn't know what the reaction would be. Well, I had some stuff happen my first month and a half of being at UT. And I just needed my mom's one of my best friends. I was like, I need to talk to my mom. And so I was on the quiet floor of the library, and she called me, and I asked if she loved me, and she said, well, yeah, of course I do, William. And I started to cry, and I told her I was gay. And then immediately I hung up the phone, ran down the hill to Tyson House, and there was a Tyson House resident there. And I called Mom back, and we talked on the phone for 2 hours, and I just sobbed. But she said, I love you. I just want you to be safe. So that was a big... And again, in that moment, like I could have gone back to my dorm, but I went to the church because I knew the church was a safe place and that there were people there and a community there who would take care of me in that moment. And it was true. So... went through the rest of my first semester, involved at Tyson House, got on the worship council, helped started to plan services, and came home for Christmas break. And over Christmas break, met my now husband, Ashton, and that was great. That was another, it's really cheesy. So this is another time when like I prayed a prayer that was like, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it was Christmas break, and I just told God, I was like, I'm not looking for anyone else. If you want me to fall in love with someone, you will send them into my life. And not 2 weeks later, I met Ashton.
Yeah, that's powerful.
So that first semester, like I had some big stuff happen. Yeah. It was a really big, important time for me.
Yeah, but it's interesting looking at it from the outside, though, to see, I mean, what comes across to me is like this long, very difficult journey of, who am I? Am I okay? Am I accepted? Am I loved? And then finding through the various ways that you've named, finding that, yes, the answer is yes. And so it sort of lines up to me that like you would have those of it. It's like you finally found base level.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then
could grow
other
from there.
life started
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I was able to grow up and like figure out who I was,
Right.
who I believed God to be,
Right.
which has grown since then. But like it was, that's a good way to put it. I found baseline.
Yeah. And so it almost just makes perfect sense that like then you would come out to your, like, because you found
Yeah.
like, okay, I know.
Yeah.
What it reminds me of too, this journey with you is, I often will say that, I think that one struggle that you're just is commonly had with Christians is that, we have this message of, especially in the Episcopal Church, of like forgiveness, love, grace, like abounds. It's,
Sunshine and rainbows.
I know, and it can be right. We can have that discussion too. But my argument is that for the most part, a lot of people don't fully you don't have that full conversion, experience, because you don't actually fully, you haven't hit rock bottom.
No.
And so I often have said that for me, my brothers and sisters that I've met in recovery are some of the best examples of folks who really understand the message
most
of
definitely.
grace. But what's interesting that I've never thought about before and seen before is I wonder if in a very similar way, if folks that have gone through a journey of sexual identity, right, it's very similar.
Yeah. I mean,
because like that I imagine like actually coming to terms with like, oh, God loves me and accepts me for who I am and created me, like coming from a level where like that might have been questioned. Yeah. Had to be just overwhelming and powerful.
That semester, and why I had kind of prayed that prayer when I had hit rock bottom. Yeah. I had some experiences that made me feel like I was worthless, that I was unloved, that I was like just scum of the earth.
And that was particularly in terms of sexuality, like.
Oh yeah, yeah. I had some really bad stuff happen, and so I was
just. You have to tell those stories, but with peers and stuff.
Kind of. It was just I'd had some. It was bad, but. So I just was like, I'm done. If you want me to find someone who is going to love me and who I can love back, and then it happened. So it's like I could write a movie about it or something.
Yeah, that's a good
So
story.
that's then. And then really from then on, the next probably...
That's about where I meet you, sort of.
But yeah, so like the next 2 years, I was at UT... I wasn't really happy. Music was very intense, and I'm not an intense person. And I was finding that out, so I switched majors and switched to religious studies. I switched to just a general music degree for like a semester, and I was like, I don't really love this. And then I switched to religious studies, and it was fine, but I just wasn't happy. And Ashton and I were long distance, and our relationship's growing and we're doing good. And so then, and kind of during that process as well, I had felt a call to maybe go deeper in my relationship with the church. I initially had thought, maybe I just want to be like a music minister at a church. But then I was like, no, I think the more I was involved at Tyson House and the more I was involved with area churches and the more I got involved with it all, I was like, no, I think it's something deeper. I think I'm being called to pastoral ministry. And I reckon it to almost a second coming out, because like I had built up this identity of like, oh, I'm music, I'm going to be music. And I distinctly remember it was after a Sunday night worship service at Tyson House, and John Tiro, who we both know, I went up to him and I was like, John, I need to talk to you about something. And he was like, okay, what is it? So like we go in his office, and like I'm like crying, and he's probably like, what on earth is wrong with this boy? And I'm like, I think I'm called to be a priest, and like crying, and he's like, that's beautiful. And he gave me a hug, and I was like, oh. So it was really like a second coming out. That I was like, this whole thing that I thought I was supposed to do is like, no, that I feel I'm called to this. So then I kind of started informal discernment, talking with clergy and stuff, and then that gets me to about August of 2018, when I took a position at your parish, your new parish out in West Knoxville as the children and youth minister. I don't know why they hired me. I had no idea what I was doing. And then that fall began formal discernment through the diocese.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, shout out to John Tier, by the way. I love you.
Yeah.
Love you, man.
He would be a good person to interview.
Yeah.
Especially about music.
Yeah. Again, big part of my life too. Interestingly, he was a big part of my life while I was at the Tyson House.
Yep.
Which is so funny.
Yep.
Which is, I don't tend to think of you as so much younger than me, but in this timeline, I had that oh crap moment. I'm really old.
I have that effect on most people. Yeah. Having only lived a quarter century.
I had a thought there. So, yeah. Well, I guess what occurred to me was, it's interesting to, I guess this is just sort of common, but I just think it's to name that, like, so oftentimes in our spiritual lives and lives in general, I guess, relationship with God, like, it was that new path, that call came out of, this experience of
of the church,
being, that, but also being like lost. Being like that none of this is working.
Yeah, being like, I'm miserable. What?
And I guess what I'm pointing to is just the common conversation around, like, I know we don't like to admit this or say this, but oftentimes we are brought closer to God in our purpose through struggle. And dark and rough times. And I don't even like naming that, but it's just terrible. It's always there.
But
it's true.
That's how it works a lot of times. Yeah. So I mean, that
great love and great suffering. People will get sick of me saying this on the podcast, but Richard Rohr says, "We know God through great love and great suffering."
I'm sure one of the church fathers said it, and I would like it more.
I'm sure.
You know my feelings on Rohr, but Richard Rohr is fine. I just think he's a little overused. But yeah, so that got me to being at St. Elizabeth's, and I was there for 3 years, and I ended up transferring out of UT and finished my religious studies degree online through another local private university, and it was wonderful. It was really more of like a seminary starter pack, which was great, and it really affirmed to me, like, oh yeah, I think I am called to this. So I was doing that, was working in the parish, came to really love parish ministry, and again was a affirmation of like, okay, yeah, I could see myself doing this full time. And I like to tell people, I'm like, well, when I was at St. E's, Brett let me do everything except celebrate the Eucharist or baptize anybody. But other than that, you let me do just about anything. And that was a really good way to test my call.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I did. Well, and a compliment to you, though, that you I didn't do that willy-nilly. You came with, whether that was a complete facade, I don't know, but you came with like this, like a knowledge and passion for and love for the church that you understood a lot of things.
Yeah.
That was comfortable for me. But so I sort of feel like in some ways, like in your spiritual timeline, like internally or spiritually, like a shift.
Oh yeah,
because what did spirituality look like through all this? I mean, these are your stories. These are the events. This is what you're going through. But like, is your spirituality then contained in the church and in the community? I mean, that's sort of what I feel like it's saying. Like, there was this internal, I mean, there was church when you were young, and then there was this internal struggle that we've talked about and named, and like, what is that with God? And then you find the church and you find the acceptance there and establish baseline. And then it sort of sounds to me like you're saying, then spirituality for William did become ministry and liturgy and these things. Is that also what it looked like internally for you? Like, was there another level? Or was it really?
I think definitely ministry? At that time, starting at St. E's, being there kind of through COVID, and really until probably about 6 months before I left to go to seminary, it was kind of my spirituality was focused through my work, which isn't great, dear listener. Don't. So
Well, service.
right. Yeah, but
it's great if your work can be spiritual.
Yeah, no, it is. Like, I found God in it, and it was fulfilling. But I also learned the need that I also needed my time with God outside of the work. The work is for God, and like it's beautiful, and like I'm glad that my chosen profession feeds me, and that I don't. Well, I'm not in parish ministry full time yet, but that it doesn't drain me.
Yeah.
But like I also need to have my own personal relationship with God, and for me that has been through music still, in spiritual direction, in when I get a chance to read, and reading, in praying with scripture, in art. I really like iconography and find icons really centering and helpful.
So so that's something I never put together with you. Like, you sort of went on like an internal spiritual journey, almost post-call experience.
Oh yeah, because the first thing they tell you before you start to the discernment, or after you're in it, you like get a spiritual director. So I did.
All of you should have spiritual directors.
Yeah,
by the
get
way,
it.
if you need one.
Shout out to Brett Backus. He's a great spiritual director. Holler at him. But yeah, so that was helpful. And I've had a couple of different directors, but in each of them kind of in different seasons of my life. And they've just helped me to grow. And also just being, and for me, this is just for me, but having the quintessential kind of Anglican and more generally just broadly Christian practices of corporate prayer, of reading scripture, of participating in the Eucharist, are what feed me and keep me grounded. And I know that when I'm not doing that, I get out of whack.
It's such a great thing for me to hear, because in some ways my personal story is opposite in a lot of ways. And so I don't know, it's just good for me to hear, especially as a priest, that what we do on Sunday is...
Yeah.
That sounds so weird to say, especially out of a priest's mouth, but like that what we do on Sunday actually is
matters.
People's spiritual journey.
Yeah, no. And I was thinking about this coming over here, like not every Sunday, and especially like, when I was in full-time parish ministry, and even now, I mean, I'm at a parish for an internship in seminary. Like, not every Sunday is a great Sunday, and not every Sunday I'm like, I really felt the Spirit of God moving today. Some Sundays are like, can this please hurry up?
Sure.
I need to leave.
Right.
But by and large, in reflection, and a lot of times for me, it's in reflection on experiences. It's like, wow, God was really present even through all the chaos.
Yeah.
God was there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because, and I don't mean that in any way as like a knock on the church experience I had growing up. It just, I think it was more I took it for granted.
Yeah.
Because I had it always.
Yeah, and I think that's normal.
I don't think I saw it in the same impactful way that people did. And so as a result, I actually did have a very separate, I've talked about this before, but like I viewed churches as just like social club stuff, mistakenly. And I had a very like deep and healthy internal personal spiritual life, but as a result judged the sort of organized religion part of it, which is why I always say like it's ironic that I felt called to ministry, because I was like didn't like organized religion. And then as a result, it's taken me a long time even in ministry, and it sort of has come full circle. And I would say not until I really, if anyone from my prior church, Ascension, is hearing this, don't hear me saying I was never spiritual in my leadership at Ascension. I'm not saying that, but being a rector at St. Elizabeth's sort of brought, I don't know, something else happened to me there where I think all clergy struggle with this.
It's maturity.
You struggle with the performative aspect. You're worried about like doing the thing right. And only when I sort of got in the groove and settled in at St. Elizabeth's did I start to then actually feel like I was worshiping. And so that sort of has come so full circle for me that like, again, to your point, like,
oh, what we're doing
actually
really
matters. Like
really
it
is mattering.
works.
God
So
is here, and
wow. Yeah.
which again, I know as I'm saying that, it sounds so weird. For
It's
priests
not
to say,
heretical.
but,
It's fine. You've got a priest and a soon-to-be priest. It's fine.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
listen to us. It's okay.
Anyway.
But yeah,
So
so I
that's
mean,
cool.
yeah. So I mean, those have been really just important for me. And you know, kind of the beautiful thing about going to seminary has been, in my seminary in particular, you know, we have morning prayer, noon Eucharist, evening prayer, Monday through Friday throughout the whole week. So, you know, and other opportunities for worships, you know, I have been able to plug in and get that grounding, which are hopefully building patterns for the rest of my ministry. And that's been really helpful and impactful. And just kind of the seminary journey in general, you know, I know you told me before I went, you were like, you know, a lot of people go in expecting they're going to have like this big, like spiritual, like, oh, now I get the whole thing. And like, I haven't had that, but just in my studies and in being in community with people and in growing and in failing, I have learned so much about God and about the church and about what we are called to do as the body of Christ. And it's been really beautiful. And I know I have grown in the last 2 years. Only 2 semesters to go. So.
So a lot of what comes out in these conversations for me are, you know, are these things I call languages for people, right? Like, what's the way that God speaks to you? So I don't feel like we've overtly named that for you. Do you have words for that?
That's hard. I almost think it's.
I mean, music sort of could be its own category.
I think it's almost multi-discipline. It's like It's kind of a mix of things. Yeah. It's in, you know, the liturgy. It's in community. I didn't think for a long time it would be community, but it is it's in relationships. You know, I like as a introverted extrovert, I do like being around people, and I like talking with others, and I like sharing our lives, and I think it's that. I don't think God has one way.
No.
In particular, that speaks to me.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it sort of is the church. It's the community, which again, given your background journey, makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah,
you know, but it is the worship. It is the people. It is the church. It's being a part of this place that, when you found it, completely transformed and changed.
Yeah,
your perception of God and yourself.
Yeah, I have a very high view of the church, capital C, and I think it really is this, like, to quote a prayer in the prayer book, this wonderful and sacred mystery. Like, it really is, and it has changed my life, and in the presence of God and the saving act of Christ has helped me.
Yeah, well, and as it should be, right? Like, again, and this is a knock on me, like, seeing the church as a social club for so long when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, and not realizing that, oh, the things we say about it are actually real. Like, this is this body of, you know, it's like spirit brothers. I say like the bonds of baptism are thicker than blood, than like blood bonds, like the spirit bonds, and like, this is like the presence of the Spirit in the world. Yeah.
But like the social club
maybe
thing,
not
like
the only, but it is intentionally recognizing we are. Yeah. The Spirit is in the world, and we share that.
Yeah. And like the church is still a social club. I mean, it. Sure, and I think for me, when I see that, it infuriates me, because I'm like, that is not what we are here to do. We are here for transformation. If you want to go down to the Elks Club, go to the Elks Club. Like, we're not about that here.
I had a real disheartening conversation with one of my best friends last night about how much of church going for the common person
is just to show up.
Literally it's about it's business. It's advancing politically and professionally, which are I think we are shielded from, or that's hidden from us a lot.
But it's definitely there.
And that, that's like, wow, man.
It's icky, Yeah.
So, okay, so language is sort of there. What about for you? I mean, do you want to continue? Is there, because we're sort of up to date. I mean, there's so many places that we could,
delve more into.
CPE, of course. And then there's what you're just coming out of, so I don't even know if you even.
Dear listener, that is clinical pastoral education, and it's a very intense experience that those of us who are crazy enough to be called ministers have to go through. I just finished it. It's 11 weeks in a hospital. I was there 60, 70 hours a week.
Thrown into trauma.
And literally saw just about everything you can imagine.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if there's anything there that you want to pull out, gosh, just in the 3 years we worked together, given that it was COVID and everything and just shutdowns and whatever. I mean, I don't know. I don't even know what you call spiritual in that. But it was going.
No,
to the trenches.
For me, COVID, it was really hard. it was really hard, especially being on a church staff and all of our roles going on top of their head. But to me, it was a beautiful reminder of the persistence of God's people. I can say for our parish, but I saw it in churches across the world. Mm-hmm. They continued the mission. Mm-hmm. They kept the faith. We had to pivot, and sometimes we did things that were like, oh, that was a bad idea, and that's okay. We just pivoted again and went to the next thing. And we continued to share the gospel, which is what people needed to hear.
And continued to speaking to the language of that God uses of community sometimes.
Of community,
we continued to somehow figure out how to foster
that.
Yeah.
Which was really hard, but we did it. And even more personally for me, I just got married in May, and in kind of reflecting on other mountaintop moments, that was an incredibly, my husband Ashton and I, we've been together for 7 years. We've been together for 7 years, going on 8 in January. And we knew we were going to get married, but, when the day finally came, we were both just little blubbery messes. We just cried the whole time because, and I can't speak for him, but for me, it was just this immense outpouring of love, of the love of God to us, and of how our lives have been so blessed, of our community, of our family, of our friends just coming together. And, and it's still, we're only 3 months out from it, so it's very fresh on my mind. But
I feel like that's so long ago.
Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of one of those, and at least in our tradition, that's the beauty of sacraments. They're touchstones.
Yeah.
And
well, what strikes me about that is, so I was there, part of it, preached, witnessed that, and it was one of the most powerful services I've ever been a part of. But actually, not until this moment of sitting with you and hearing you tell
the trajectory of
does that then make this is it makes sense why this was just such a charged, powerful.
Yeah, I never thought that was going to happen.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Sort of natural segue from that. So one of the questions I ask everyone always is, so what is the most powerful / significant spiritual experience, whatever that means, you've had? I keep waiting for people to tell me a ghost story, but they have, or an encounter with angels or something.
No, I wish I was cool like that. That's really hard. I think, that first time at Tyson House was a really pivotal moment. My marriage was really pivotal. I'm putting a lot of which is probably not good. I'm putting a lot of expectation on my ordination one day, and I think, but I'm thinking about it the same way I thought about my marriage, and I was like, I'm gonna be crying the whole time, and I did my marriage, and I think my ordinations, I'll just be crying the whole time because there's this immense feeling of God. I also have found opportunities when I've preached, preaching has become incredibly sacred and spiritual for me.
It's a weird experience, definitely.
It's really weird. Yeah, it's like you're talking, but at times you're not really talking. And I kind of black out sometimes, and I sit down and I'm like, oh, what just happened? What did I just say?
Yeah.
And then I have to go back and rewatch, and I'm like, oh,
I find
okay.
the whole process is weird because I'll often compare it to like a comedian works on a routine, an hour routine,
Yeah.
and then uses that for
Yeah.
a good year, a whole tour. Or you take a massive rock band like they wrote a few songs and they have to play those their whole
over and
entire
over and over.
life.
Yeah.
And where a preacher, you have to tap into that place every week for some of us,
Sometimes more than once a week.
and be inspired and let the Spirit speak to you and birth this thing. I always use birth analogy for some reason.
Yeah.
And you just then release it.
And it's
gone,
there.
And that's it.
Yep. Until the next one. Yeah, it's weird. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Dear listener, if you're a preacher, watching comedians is really helpful. That's really helped me. Come stand up. That's helped me in my preaching. Yeah, timing and just like cadence and working with the crowd.
What else you want to name, William?
I don't know. Just
To those main touch points.
yeah. And like, I mean, I had CPE this summer, and
How about this?
ask me.
like
Shoot.
Not saying that it's audible, for some people it is, but when God speaks to you,
I have never
is
had
it gut? Is it music? Is it community? Is it
It's not
people?
music. It's
What
not
is it?
music. I have never had like heard the voice of God,
Sure.
which I'm so jealous of people
Right.
who can.
There are folks who do that.
There are. For me, a lot of time it's gut and it's in others.
Okay.
It's in gut and in others, and a lot of times like I'll feel something in my gut, kind of like with a call to ministry. Like
It's a knowing.
I felt it in my gut, and I was like, and I kind of ran away from it, and then finally when I said it, when I came out of that, and it was affirmed, I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is real. And then through a discernment process of having others discern with me and be like, yeah, this is real. Go right ahead. So it's in gut and in others. I really like talking to people and just kind of like just killing time and just talking. And the art of small talk, I really enjoy it.
Well, it's fascinating because I think we can say those things sort of nonchalantly often about like, oh, I see God in other people, or oh, I see God in like synchronicities and experiences. But like, really, there is this whole very true and intense and beautiful level of like, if you're paying attention, to use the old cliches of like, when a door closes, a window opens, or whatever, right? Like, but that's real.
But it's real.
And if you're paying attention, you've witnessed that happen in relationships with people and in community.
Yep.
And
For me, it's it's kind of a Jesuit Ignatian kind of thing of seeing Eucharistically. We celebrate this thing week in, week out, sometimes daily if you're in a community that is so blessed. And you can just look at it as your cracker and your wine, but if you do look at it as the body and blood, if you see like, oh, this is the divine, then when you go out into your everyday world, you're like, well, wow, if God is found there, God is found in me, God is found in others, God is found in creation, God is found. So it is
that's what we're supposed to be seeing.
That's what we're supposed to be seeing. Yeah, that's the lifelong. Yeah. But again, I've only lived a quarter century, so I've got some time to continue practicing that.
Yeah. Good.
So,
anything else you want to name?
I don't think so. That's about it.
Okay. Cool. Well, I appreciate you having this conversation with me. It's a pleasure, as I've done with everybody, like to sit and just get to people I know in context and just getting to see and hear and know in a whole different way. And so it's a pleasure and an honor. I appreciate you doing it. It's been a pleasure and honor to be part of your journey and your story with Ashton and his story. And I look forward to having more of that story develop. So Yeah.
Amen.
Blessings on you and your call and ministry and your last chapter here in seminary and
The future.
forward. Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Salute.